Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Andrew DiCecco is in the house today. A little NFL draft on our mind. That and more. Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com is here with another look at some Eagles stuff, some draft, plus something that stood out this week from the owners' meetings and more right now with Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com. He joins me on another edition of Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. DiCecco, what's up, brother?
Mike, I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing real good. Looking forward to draft night. We are closing in. You know, we're having a big old draft party on Thursday, the night of the draft down at Maynard's in Margate. So looking forward to that party as always. And, you know, one of the things we're going to be looking at is pick number 10, pick number 30, and what the likelihood is. So a month out right now, I'll ask you this. How likely is it that the Eagles pick 10?
I think they're going to trade down and pick up some assets because I think there's going to be a pass rusher or an offensive lineman that they really like, and taking them at 10 would be a little rich. That's just my early thought.
So you think they'll be out of the 10 spot when they make that pick on Thursday night, the 27th? How about 30? Do they want to stay at 30, or do you think they want to bounce back again? You know, they don't have a lot of picks in those middle rounds, 4, 5, 6. They have nothing there. So is 30 a spot that makes sense to stay or bounce?
Well, I think it all depends on who's on the board at that time, or as the Eagles are leading up to their pick. It wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles trade back from 30 as well, because there's a lot of players who I mentioned that fall into that sweet spot between the 30th pick and when the Eagles would pick next at 62. You look at Antonio Johnson, the safety, Deonte Banks, a corner from Maryland, who I like a lot. There's a number of players that fall in that category that I think that they could trade back, accumulate some more picks, and that seems like a Howie Roseman move, if I had to guess.
Yeah, you're not lying on that, Andrew DiCecco. You know, I wanted to get your thoughts on what has happened here in the last week since you and I got a chance to catch up. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they did was they signed Terrell Edmunds, and that happened, you know, last week, and he replaces, obviously, C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I'm interested to see what you thought of that deal and how he fits in to this defense.
Yeah, you know, it's a great deal for the Eagles. I mean, they're getting a player who started 75 games, played in 79, played a lot of special teams, over 500 snaps in his career, so you're getting a multifaceted safety. Now, the market told him, it tells you what his value is, right? I mean, he was a player that was around late into the second wave of free agency. He is sort of who he is at this point. He's 26 years old. There's not a lot of turnover production as far as Terrell Edmunds goes. I mean, I really liked him coming out of Virginia Tech. I thought he was immensely overdrafted when the Steelers took him as the 28th overall pick in 2018. But he's a thumper in the traditional sense. He's a box safety, physical player, smart player. He can cover a little bit. You tend to worry if he's in space for too long, and teams are going to look to try and take advantage of that area of his game. That's not exactly what he's most adept at. I think he's best coming downhill and in pursuit and playing the run. But I mean, at this point in free agency, and I've told this to a lot of people. I mean, the options are limited, and you're getting a 26-year-old who's played a lot of football. So I think that it's a really good. I think it's a good signing given the circumstances.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this since the deal that happened on Friday. So you were on Thursday last week, so we hadn't got a chance to really dive into him. But is he more the replacement for Epps? Is he more the replacement for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson?
I mean, to me, it seems like he would be the replacement for Epps.
Interesting.
Just given skill set and how he fits, to me that screamed, you know, Marcus Epps replacement.
Right, and he's been. I mean, last year, if you look at his snaps, 35% of them came in the box. I mean, more of a box safety. You know, he's a guy that has struggled in coverage a little bit. But do you overall like the move? And do you feel all right? They lost two guys, but they've adequately replaced at least one of them.
Yeah, I mean, he's a replacement level starter right now, but like I said, he's 26 years old. I think the value's great, and you're getting somebody that logged a ton of snaps and has played a lot of football. So I think that's a great great value that late in the free agency to find somebody like that. And I always caution everyone to sort of temper your expectations. You're not going to necessarily get a world beater here at safety, but he's a competent player, and that's really all you can ask for at this stage, this late in the game. I think that they've sort of adequately addressed that. He's playing in a secondary with perhaps two of the best cornerback tandem in football, so that can help mask some of his deficiencies.
All right. And by the way, get your thoughts while we're talking about safety. This safety draft class, is this a spot, maybe 30, trade back? Is there safeties in this draft late first, maybe early second, or somewhere that you would say, you know what, there's a spot right there that seems like it would make a lot of sense for that position? Because I know safety's not a place they're going to take him at number 10.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Banks is my favorite, one of my favorite players in this draft, the safety there, but there's little to no chance that the Eagles are going to take a safety in the first round. At the end of the first, it's interesting. Like I mentioned, the trade down, you look at a safety like Antonio Johnson from Texas A&M. In my mock draft, they had Sidney Brown from Illinois there at 62. So there are a couple of options. You don't want to wait too long in the draft because you do ideally want to find a replacement, a suitable replacement to pair opposite Terrell Edmunds, where he can learn from. You don't want to get too far down there because then you're relying on a Kayvon Wallace-esque player in the fourth round to develop at a rapid pace to sort of supplement what you already have there.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4. I saw you write a nice piece over at InsideTheBirds.com about Trey Sermon, and he was an interesting guy in terms of this week because he was brought up by Nick Sirianni. It almost sounded like, hey, man, we have a role coming for this guy in 2023. So give us your thoughts on Trey Sermon and maybe what kind of role he may be able to carry in 2023.
Yeah, Trey Sermon's pretty interesting, and you even heard Jeff and Adam speak about this on the Inside the Birds podcast about his practice habits and how he's a really good practice player and stood out in that way. So when you hear Nick Sirianni speak glowingly about him, he stopped. He didn't stop after talking about the main three. He kept going, and to me, when they acquired Trey Sermon 10 days before the opener, that to me always screamed that they were sort of stashing him for the future, that he wasn't necessarily going to have an impact or play a prominent role on offense in 2022, but that they get him in the system for a year, get him in that room with Jamel Singleton, have him learn a little bit. Maybe you take a step back and watching the game, seeing the game from a different perspective allows him to sort of come into next year re-energized and refocused, and sometimes a clean slate. A lot of times it's beneficial to young players. So I think that the Eagles clearly like him. They want to take a long look at him. He has age on his side. He certainly has the pedigree. So that's certainly going to stir up some optimism going into training camp. And I think you're going to see him get the lion's share of the work because you want to see what he has. And, obviously the first year of his career it got off to a rocky start. And the second year of year two, the early part of year two didn't work out. He was actually waived in favor of Jordan Mason, an undrafted free agent. So you wonder what happened there. But like I said, former third-round pick. He has almost 3,500 scrimmage yards from college. He's a big bruising type of running back. You want to get him in your system and see if maybe you can evoke some of those skills that were once so prominently, sort of coveted in the draft there.
Yeah, it's interesting because he came from a team in San Francisco that likes to run the ball. They're creative. They run the ball. And you're wondering, what did they miss on him? What did they not see in him? Because I like Sermon. When they brought him over here, I was like, this is an interesting thing. He got 2 carries last year, maybe 4. I don't remember what the exact number is. But
2. He had 2 for 19.
Okay, 2 carries last year. But so is he a guy that could okay, I'll ask you this. Do you anticipate, somebody asked me this the other day, over under 400 yards for Trey Sermon?
I would take the under there, but I do think that he's going to get a look, and I think that the coaching staff likes what they saw enough so where I wouldn't necessarily even consider him a dark horse. I think that he's got an outside shot, a decent shot at making the roster if he can stay healthy, because you look at, he's still playing on a rookie contract, 24 years old, and all those good things. And like I said, sometimes a change of scenery is what a player needs to just sort of get out of that environment and take a step back. Because sometimes, like I mentioned to you before, the different young players progress at different speeds at the NFL level, and maybe he was sort of thrown into the fire a little bit too early. But it was very telling, Mike, that they kept him on the roster despite the the injury, like all the injury moves that they were needed to be made. I thought that they them keeping him there and finding other ways to tweak the roster really was telling in what they think that they have in him. They didn't want to expose him to waivers. Janarius Robinson, the defensive end, is another player to me that it really piqued my interest when they found ways to make sure that they stayed around. He was on IR a number of times, Janarius Robinson. But I thought keeping Trey Sermon on the active roster, considering all the roster shuffling that was going on, definitely speaks to what they think they have in him.
Yeah, because it was interesting. Andrew DiCecco with us, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. Sirianni says, quote, "I can't tell you how many times at practice he made a cut or you just saw him in his pads or he made a play on a screen or whatever it was. I wish we could get him more touches." Well, you could have got him more touches. You felt that Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell were better than him, I would imagine, and those guys are both still here. So I don't know. How does Sermon get a role?
Well, I would say that there's probably it's a multi-layered comment that he made there. I mean, obviously you would love to get him more touches, but he was thrown into a new system 10 days before the season. So there might have been certain aspects of his game they necessarily weren't comfortable enough throwing him in there. Pass protection could be one of them. Just things like that. And I think that they really liked his skill set. They liked the way that they like what they saw from him in practice, but maybe not enough so where they wanted to disrupt the three-headed rushing attack that they already had. They also could have known in the back of their minds that Miles Sanders was a long shot from returning, and Sermon was going to get an opportunity in the summer to really make a name for himself. So he's a player that I've listed as one of my 6 under-the-radar Eagles that I'm most looking forward to seeing in this offseason because he's going to have a tremendous opportunity to take on some snaps.
Yeah, that should be interesting to see if he has a role. Because Penny, I mean, I don't know, what do you think Penny's role is? I know he has an injury history, but let's just hypothesize on a March day that he makes it through the season healthy. What kind of role does Penny have and how that kind of affects – because if you have Penny, Gainwell, and Scott, again, I go back to what kind of role can you have for 4 running backs on a team?
I think you would ideally like to lighten the load for someone like Rashad Penny, who does have an extensive injury history. You know how lethal he's been when he has been available, Mike. But I think that ideally you would like to see Rashad Penny take on the early down work. I don't see him as a volume runner in this offense. There's going to be carries to be had. You're going to disperse it amongst, Kenny Gainwell, Boston Scott, and I do think that there will be a piece of the pie for Trey Sermon. That said, look at the history for Rashad Penny. Availability has not been his strong suit over the years. So I think going into the season with him as your lone big-bodied running back to sort of complement what you already have there in the stable with Gainwell and Boston Scott would be malpractice. So I think keeping somebody on hand like a Trey Sermon, who was very cost-effective, he does have the size and some intriguing intangibles. You want to keep somebody like that around because you don't want to put all your chips you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and relying on Rashad Penny being healthy. So there'll be some opportunities.
Yeah, and then I guess, this draft class at running back, everybody talk about Bijan Robinson and the possibility. I don't think the Eagles would take him at 10. I think it's an interesting conversation. You're a draft guy and you like to think outside the box here. Mm-hmm. I would imagine, okay, if the Eagles were on the board at 10, does Robinson have to be the best player available on their board when it's their turn to pick?
Yeah, I mean,
that doesn't mean they'll take them. That doesn't mean they'll take them. I'm just saying, if you're going off best player available and you're doing your rankings true to yourself, he would have to be the highest player available when they got to number 10.
Yeah, I have to think so. And then it just comes down to positional value and how does the team view the running back position, which we well know how they do. So I still do think that this team is going to stick by the philosophy that's gotten them this far, and they're going to look to add to the defensive line or the offensive line. I also think they could stand to add another defensive back, whether it be corner, certainly safety. Those are the positions I would look for. I circled pick number 94 because that's a position that's a spot in the draft where they can go a number of ways. There's going to be a lot of talent available. There's a linebacker I like from Tulane, Dorian Williams. They need to add another linebacker. That's a really depleted area on their team, and I think that relying on Nicholas Morrow and Kobe Dean, who's vastly improved, I think he's only had 30-some snaps in the NFL. You want to sort of supplement that and have a contingency plan in there. I look at running back, Tank Bigsby from Auburn as a player that I put in my mock draft going to the Eagles at 94 because I still do think they need to add to the running back rotation. I'm still not entirely sold on Rashad Penny's staying healthy and available and being somebody they can rely on moving forward. So I still think they need to add to that. So, and you could also look at receiver too, right? Jaden Reed is a receiver from Michigan State who offers return upside, good slot presence, can be a vertical slot, good after the catch in the open field. He's another player that would slot right in that spot too. So they can go a number of ways there.
Yeah, that's that running back room going to be very interesting with Penny, because as you can kind of further the conversation here, if he's healthy, I don't know, he's probably a more productive player than Sanders would be if he could stay healthy.
100%. I totally agree with that. I just think that he provides more from an intangible standpoint, just a more well-rounded runner, and someone that I think can be a 3-down running back. Whereas Miles Sanders was very limited and inconsistent. If Penny stays healthy, he can crack 1,000 easily. But we just don't know. There's not the data would tell you that. I mean, that would be a risky proposition to go into the season with him as your one without much behind him.
I know we're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, Andrew from InsideTheBirds.com. I know last year we would talk during the season, X factor, give me a player, Quez Watkins' name would come up a lot. Do they need to upgrade the slot wide receiver spot still?
I think they do, but it's not as pressing. I mean, right now, as we stand here on March 30th, they only have 6 draft picks, so it's kind of hard to address all the areas of need in one foul swoop, right? So I think that if the opportunity presents itself, absolutely. If there's a low-cost veteran out there in free agency that you think would be an upgrade and maybe make Quez the 4, okay. But I don't want to overlook what Quez can bring to an offense. He has speed, which is a very important trait that the teams covet. He can take the top off it. He can draw coverage away. But on the other side of that coin, Mike, he had a hand in 3 of the Eagles' losses last season. So you have to wonder where he's at. If that's a sign of things to come, if that's something he's going to work to get over, if that is something he can get over. But I mean, he was very accountable after the season in the locker room cleanout. You heard him take ownership for a lot of his faults. And you hope that he takes takes some of his deficiencies from the season and learns from that and grows from that, because he does have some potential. And I think that he can be a good number 3 in this league. But if I'm the Eagles, I am still looking to add to that just to have some competition, because you certainly don't want to hand him the job this summer. You want him to earn it.
Yeah, well, the summer workouts are going to be starting soon. The draft is less than a month away. And before we know it, training camp. I know we're talking about training camp. It's opening day of the baseball season, but we're already thinking about training camp, and it'll be here before we know it, man. The calendar starts to move fast in the NFL offseason. Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4. And, of course, you can read all his work over at InsideTheBirds.com, where he has a great piece up on Trey Sermon. And check that out. And, of course, the new Eagles safety, Terrell Edmunds, that piece up now over at InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew DiCecco, we'll see you soon, bud.
All right, Mike. Looking forward to it. Talk soon.
All right, Andrew DiCecco here on the Sports Bash Live.